The red and blue lights pulsed across my front yard, casting a wild, chaotic glow. Two men stood in my driveway, dressed in what looked like bargain bin police costumes straight off a Halloween store's clearance rack. One gripped a clipboard with an air of authority, while the other fumbled with a plastic megaphone, his fingers clumsily searching for the right button. Behind them stood Lisa, the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood HOA, arms crossed and a smug grin plastered across her face. "Sir," the guy with the megaphone barked, his voice crackling through the cheap speaker. "You're in violation of local agricultural ordinances, and we're authorized to seize your property." I blinked, completely thrown off. The only thing these clowns seemed qualified to seize was a 2-for-1 deal at a diner. Still, I decided to play along, stepping onto my porch with mock concern. "Whoa, now," I said, raising my hands. I didn't realize growing tomatoes was a federal offense. "It is if you're doing it without HOA approval." Lisa snapped from the sidewalk, her lime green jacket practically glowing in the afternoon sun. I glanced at my illegal farm, a humble garden patch with tomatoes, peppers, and a few herbs. Hardly a front for some shady operation. The clipboard guy puffed out his chest. "We're prepared to escalate this legally if you don't comply." "Legally?" I echoed, barely hiding a smirk. "You sure about that?" "Absolutely," Lisa cut in. "This neighborhood is zoned for decorative plants only. You can't just run a backwoods farming scheme and expect to get away with it." The costume cop cleared his throat and stepped forward. "If you resist, we'll have to call the authorities." That was it. I couldn't hold back anymore. Call the authorities? I reached into my back pocket, pulled out my badge, and held it up. The county sheriff's department emblem gleamed in the light. Clipboard guy froze, his eyes darting between my badge and his partner, who suddenly found the cracks in my driveway fascinating. "I am the authorities," I said. Lisa's face twisted in confusion. "Wait, you're a sheriff?" "Yep," I said, grinning. "And you just tried to scam a law enforcement officer with two guys who look like they flunked out of a community theater audition." The clipboard hit the pavement with a clatter, and the two imposters bolted, one tripping over my garden hose and flailing like a startled bird before vanishing down the street. Lisa, still rooted to the spot, tried to salvage her pride. "Well," she stammered, "the point still stands. That garden violates HOA standards." "Lisa," I said, stepping closer, "I suggest you stick to your petunias and mind your own business for once." She didn't have a comeback. She spun on her heel and marched off, leaving me shaking my head in the driveway. I should have known that wasn't the end of it. The next morning, my trash cans were toppled, their contents scattered across the lawn. I figured raccoons at first, until I spotted Lisa's little terrier prancing away with a sandwich wrapper dangling from its mouth. Sighing, I grabbed a trash bag and cleaned up. Later that day, a flurry of HOA violation notices arrived. One claimed my mailbox was a 1/4 inch too tall, another said my garden was a visual obstruction, and the kicker accused my lawn of being excessively green. Too green? This had Lisa's petty fingerprints all over it. Most people might have shrugged it off, but I wasn't about to let it slide. The breaking point came when I found footprints in my garden, human ones this time. Some tomatoes were missing, and several plants had been yanked out. I suspected Lisa, but I needed proof. That night, I set up a motion-activated camera and waited. At midnight, my phone buzzed. I checked the footage, expecting to see Lisa, but it wasn't her. It was her terrier, digging like it was hunting for buried treasure, dragging off a half-eaten bell pepper in triumph. The next morning, Lisa stood in her driveway, sipping coffee like she hadn't just launched a one-woman vendetta against my property. I marched over, phone in hand. "Morning," I said, holding up the video. "Looks like your little pal's been raiding my garden." She glanced at the screen, her face flickering between annoyance and embarrassment. "I'll deal with it," she muttered. "You sure?" I asked, because I'd hate to file a report about someone running an unlicensed veggie thief. Her scowl deepened, but she stayed quiet. That afternoon, I saw her pacing her yard, leash in hand, yelling for her dog. Turns out the terrier had wandered off again. Despite our feud, I couldn't just leave her hanging. I grabbed my flashlight and joined the search. It didn't take long. The dog was wedged under a neighbor's porch, yipping helplessly. I fished him out and handed him back to Lisa. "Thanks," she mumbled, clutching the trembling furball. "Don't mention it." I replied. But keep him out of my tomatoes. For a split second, she almost smiled, then remembered who she was and stiffened. You're still facing the HOA tribunal, she said, hugging her dog tighter. I laughed, walking back home. Can't wait. Sure enough, the next day, my mailbox was plastered with more HOA notices. One claimed my fence clashed with the neighborhood vibe, identical to everyone else's. Another said my front door was too rustic. No rule against that. And the best one declared my garden an unauthorized farming zone threatening suburban harmony. Classic Lisa. I sipped my coffee and checked my garden. The terrier had been at it again, leaving paw prints trailing back to her place. That afternoon, driving home from the sheriff's office, I saw Lisa at the edge of her driveway, phone to her ear, looking furious. Curiosity won out. Rough day. I called as I pulled in. She stormed over, heels clicking like gunfire. Your garden, she spat, is attracting pests, rabbits, raccoons, you name it. They're all after your little farm. I sipped my coffee, fighting a laugh. Lisa, I'm pretty sure those critters were here before my tomatoes. No, she snapped. This is your fault. That garden's trouble, and I won't stand for it. She jabbed a finger at me like I was a disobedient kid. I'm taking this to the HOA meeting. Looking forward to it, I said, heading inside. The next week, things escalated. My garden looked like a crime scene. Plants uprooted, herbs trampled, and human footprints everywhere. The terrier wasn't big enough for this. That night, I repositioned my camera for a wider view. At midnight, it pinged. I grabbed my phone and watched. There was Lisa, flashlight in hand, stomping through my tomatoes like she was auditioning for a villain role. The next morning, I didn't waste time. I marched to her door and rang the bell. She answered, terrier under her arm, fake smile in place. Morning, I said, showing her the footage. Care to explain this? Her face went pink to match her jacket. I was inspecting, she stammered. Your garden's a health hazard. Health hazard? I repeated. What? Is my basil loitering? Her lips tightened. The HOA tribunal will sort this out. I laughed. Good luck. That weekend, the tribunal convened in the community clubhouse, a stuffy room reeking of stale coffee. The HOA president, Greg, a guy who took his title way too seriously, sat at the head with Lisa beside him like a loyal sidekick. We're here, Greg began, adjusting his glasses, to address the flagrant violations by resident Daniel Hayes. Flagrant? I nearly chuckled. Lisa launched into her spiel, claiming my tomatoes were destabilizing the neighborhood's ecosystem, my basil was harassing wildlife, and my carrots were a danger to kids. When she finished, I stood. Lisa left out the part where she trespassed and trashed my garden. I played the video. The room went silent as Lisa's flashlight bobbed across the screen, her yanking plants like a deranged gardener. Her face turned beet red. Greg cleared his throat. MS. Thompson, you owe Mr. Hayes an apology. But he's breaking rules, she sputtered. His tomatoes are illegal. Check the HOA guidelines. I cut in. Nothing against veggies. Greg nodded. Case closed. Lisa stormed out, but the next day, my mailbox was stuffed with more petty notices. She wasn't done. Digging deeper, I called some contacts at the county records office. Turns out Lisa's pristine yard had its own secrets, an unpermitted deck extension and a side gig selling homemade dog treats, both HOA violations. At the next meeting, I presented the evidence. Greg's disappointment was palpable. Lisa's excuses, her deck was essential, and her treats charitable, fell flat. She got fined, ordered to dismantle the deck, and told to shut down her treat hustle unless she got permits. I didn't stick around for her tantrum. I thought that was it, but then a note appeared in my screen door. This isn't over. 2 days later, a certified letter summoned me to another tribunal. Lisa claimed my garden violated state agricultural laws. At the meeting, she sat smugly as Greg announced her new evidence. She'd convinced someone in the county to buy her story. My basil was invasive, my tomatoes bulk grown, my peppers commercial. I almost laughed. I'm not selling peppers. I'm making salsa. Greg sighed. I'll check with the county. Lisa smirked. I already reported it. They're sending an inspector. She'd pulled strings. I made my own calls. A friend at the agriculture department laughed for 5 minutes before promising an official visit. 2 days later, Inspector Tom arrived, calm, methodical, unimpressed. After checking my garden, he said, "No issues here. Just a nice home setup, no permits needed." Then he grinned. "Heard an anonymous tip about illegal business here, though. Not you, her dog treats." Armed with Tom's report and county findings on Lisa's treat operation, I shut her down at the next meeting. She got 30 days to comply or face more fines. She stormed out, terrier in tow. That night, I saw her pacing, yelling into her phone, rattled, not just mad. The next morning, a basket of cookies, treats, and a note. "Peace offering, Lisa," sat on my doorstep. I hesitated, but the cookies were damn good. The terrier-approved treats confirmed it. Days later, Lisa was back at it. Another notice claimed my garden was under review. She'd filed a wild report calling it industrial agriculture. I called Tom again. He re-inspected, laughed at her conspiracy, and signed off. Meanwhile, Lisa was dismantling her deck, sweating and cursing. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my tools and helped. "Need a hand?" She glared but relented. We tore it down together. She barked orders, I ignored half. By sunset, she admitted, "I went overboard with your garden." "You think?" I teased. She smirked. "My husband used to handle this stuff. After he passed, I took on too much." It clicked. She wasn't just a pest. She was clinging to control. "Next time, just talk to me," I said. "I'll think about it," she quipped. Things shifted. Her notices lost their venom. I planted lavender and rosemary by her fence, dog-friendly herbs. She never thanked me, but another basket appeared. I ate a cookie without hesitation. Delicious.